Okay.
Okay.
And we expect more people. Hopefully, we are going to have more people later on joining the meeting. Okay. I already introduced Aviad. Aviad actually he came. He was here in Ottawa maybe a couple of months ago. Aviad,
Yep.
presenting his book, was a very
Nahon-Serfaty.
interesting. Voila. Yes, I'm going to ask you also to turn off your mics, to mute your mics, please, for now. And we had the chance to meet him in person. And we had many questions after his wonderful presentation here in Ottawa. We had many questions for him. It's a fascinating subject, particularly for those like me, you know, as you can hear maybe, a Hispanic Jew from Morocco. But in general, I think it's a very interesting subject because of the richness, because of the impact of these Jews all around the world, particularly in Israel, in Latin America, and in other regions. And then I have my first question for Aviad is about the Jewish Moroccan experience in general, not only the experience of the Spanish-speaking Jews in Morocco, but in general, why this experience should be considered exceptional when compared to the experiences of other Jewish communities in the Maghreb or the Middle East. Aviad, why this is that special?
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you, Isaac, for the invitation and for being so flexible with the time, as you mentioned. I know I gave you our time with choosing the date, but thank you so much, and I'm really happy to be here. So when we speak about just a question, when we speak about Moroccan exceptionalism, it's not just an academic idea. This is something we have to realize. Okay, it's a living concept that was created and still being used by the Moroccan state, as well as by the Jewish Moroccan diaspora, as you know very well, around the world, including in Israel, by the way, which is a very important aspect. And just to make sure we understand or we know what we mean by Moroccan exceptionalism, so it's the basic claim, the idea that Morocco isn't just like the rest of the so-called Arab world, because it's because it's basically, this is the general framing of it, it's an island of stability and pluralism. And in that framing, Jewish heritage also becomes very important. I'll give you one example, actually a striking example. So in 2011, Morocco revised its constitution. And this constitution, the revised one, described Moroccan uniqueness or Moroccan unique identity as something that is shaped by Arab Islamic identities, Amazigh, which is Berber, the indigenous population in Morocco, Saharan elements, Andalusian cultures, Mediterranean culture, but also very prominently the Hebraic. This is how they framed it, not the Jewish, but Hebraic traditions.
Hebraic, yes.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into this, because why they chose this specific terminology rather than Jewish, but just for you to understand, this is very meaningful for Morocco itself as a state, as the general public really pays attention to this thing. Now, like any national ethos, I don't know how much time I have to develop it, but I have a lot to say. So like any national ethos, this idea of exceptionalism has some anchor in history itself. First of all, prior to European colonialism, Jews were essentially the only non-Muslim minority in Morocco. If you compare this to the Ottoman Empire, for instance, the neighboring empire that bordered Morocco, Jews were, in this place, Jews were among several other minorities, Armenians, Greek, other Muslim groups, Shiite, Druze, which are not Muslim, but they departed from Islam, all kind of different groups. And in Morocco itself, that was completely different because there was far less competition, so to speak, over this traditional role of minorities and competition over patronage coming from the state. And Jews could become central to commerce, to diplomacy, to all kind of court services. And here's where another related source of Moroccan uniqueness is really important or connects directly, because as I mentioned, Morocco was never conquered by the Ottoman Empire, which was the most significant, empire ruling the Islamic world until the modern era, until basically the beginning of the 20th century. So it stood at the western edge of the Islamic world and on the frontier with Christian Europe, bordering the Iberian Peninsula. And in this specific context, I'll give you one example just to clarify what I mean. So the sultans, the rulers in Morocco, they started calling themselves as Emir al-Mu'minin, the commanders, the defenders of the believers, because they claimed that the fact that Morocco had never been fully conquered proved that they rule by divine decree. They could stop the infidels or the Ottoman Empire. Now, how does that matter for understanding Jewish experience, alluding to your question? So the sultans started, to preserve this identity while maintaining contact with European powers. And Jews played a crucial role as the only minority because they were the only ones who could actually directly trade communication and commerce with the infidels, the infidel world, so-called infidel world, because it was prohibited by this kind of Islam ruling Morocco at the time, influenced by the Wahhabi extremists coming from what is today Saudi Arabia. I won't get into that. But to be short, Jews became kind of Goy shel Shabbat, Shabbos Goy, handling this trade from Morocco, and it was very, very prominent in their experience. Now,
just to briefly explain for the non-Jews participants here, this idea of the Goy Shabbat is the one that, can perform things that maybe a Muslim cannot do, or would play this role as a mediator between the Muslim or the Islamic world and the rest of the world, particularly in Europe and other regions.
Yeah, exactly. So, and the basic idea was that they could not openly, engage in commerce with the so-called infidels, that they had to use this intermediary group, the Jews, whereas in the Ottoman Empire, for instance, you would see all kind of different larger, demographically larger groups like the Christians, the Armenians, engaging in commerce and other kind of interactions. So that was very important. Now, the most famous narrative, I think, of all, when we talk about the unique relationship between the sultans and later the kings, they become kings after 57. The relation with the Jews is the story of Sultan Muhammad or King Muhammad V protecting the Jews during the pro-Nazi, the Vichy era. And basically, he said that he considered the Jews to be first and foremost his own subject rather than just the Jewish minority. And that later became very, very prominent in, proving or serving as a proof that Morocco was tolerant and liberal more than many other places in the world at the time. Now, Moroccan Jews maintained a clear sense of pride because of this, in belonging to Morocco, in remembering Morocco, even after leaving. And we know that most Jews left eventually, or had left the country in the 60s. Starting from the 40s, or even before, if you talk about Spanish Moroccan Jews, but it went all the way through the late 20th century. Now, in this context, we can't really understand this pride without talking about the largest concentration of Moroccan Jews today, or since the 60s actually, in the world. And this is in Israel, particularly in southern Israel, in the Negev, right? I can't talk more about it because there's so much to say, but just one point that I want to make is that in the 90s, when heritage tourism, return trips to Morocco began to expand dramatically because of Moroccan policies, Israelis were welcome too. They started traveling to Morocco, and that was quite unique. One of the largest diaspora of Moroccan Jews of a population that hailed from the Arab world was present in Israel. Israel and Morocco hadn't established official ties, relation at the time. They were, semi-official in a way, but still you had waves of people traveling to Morocco. And that was rather unique when you compare it to places in the Arab world, because people could actually see their own homeland with their own eyes and develop the attachment that is beyond nostalgia. Now, relatedly, I mentioned nostalgia, so I want to say another thing about it. Well, it's not exactly included in the Moroccan narrative of exceptionalism, as I mentioned, but for decades, as Israel was, or Moroccan Jews in Israel were the largest single country of origin group in Israel. And that also came with this notion that they experienced significant hardship of integration in the country. Think about the Israeli Black Panthers, for instance. They were all Moroccans. The first protest, ethnic protest in Israel, Wadi Salib, in 1959, all Moroccans. So they became representatives or even emblem symbols of the Mizrahi struggle, the struggle against the establishment of the Ashkenazi establishment, the European establishment in Israel. And that, in fact, intensified their attachment or nostalgia for Morocco, even among third and fourth generations in Israel. So these are all points of uniqueness that we can, mention when you try to compare the Moroccan experience to other communities in the Arab world. There's so much to say, and I'd love to hear your voice and your questions perhaps about it. But I want to stop here because I know there are other questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Aviad. Then let's go back to your book. Your book consecrated to one particular community in the Moroccan, let's say, Jewish community, the Spanish-speaking Moroccan Jewish community. And I would like you to briefly explain the main argument of your book and what was your objective? What wanted you to convey by writing this book to maybe the general audience, scholars, people interested in this subject?
Wow. Yeah. Do you want the longer or the short answer?
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean,
I'll try to,
Okay.
I'll try to be in between. So I'd like to connect it directly to what I just said about, Moroccan exceptionalism. So basically the book adds another layer to that exceptionalism because it talks about Morocco's relation with Spain and the Hispanic world, and particularly how it played a role in shaping Jewish history in Morocco. That's a completely different layer of exceptionalism that we don't hear in any other history about Jews from our countries. And let me provide some background so it will be clear. So, like many Jews in Morocco or in North Africa altogether, the Jews of northern Morocco, which is basically, I don't have the map here, but it's those who come from the region know it very well, but just for the students and other people, it's the Mediterranean belt of Morocco, the northern part of Morocco, sitting exactly on the borders between Morocco and the Iberian Peninsula, right? It's just like 16 miles away from the northmost point in Morocco, Tangier, to the Iberian Peninsula, to Algeciras and other places in what is Spain today and what used to be also what's still Gibraltar. It's under British control, but it used to be part of the British Empire in earlier days. So, like many Jews, as I mentioned, in Morocco and North Africa, the Jews were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula at the end of the 15th century. I think that history is well known or known enough. So, unlike other groups in Morocco, this specific group maintained a century-old cultural connection to Spain because they continue speaking what you just mentioned before we started this conversation, Isaac. They continued speaking Haketia, which was, in a way, I mean, the vast vocabulary of it was based on Spanish etymology. The base was Spanish, and they added Arabic, Aramaic, Darija, the local dialect in Morocco, Hebrew, all kind of, Berber or Amazigh words that really gave it its flavor that we know today. But the etymology, the basis was Spanish. Now, here's the real twist, because between 1912 and 1956, while most of the region and most of Morocco fell under French control, northern Morocco came under Spanish control. So this presented a really unprecedented case or occurrence in the colonial history, because you had an indigenous Jewish population in Morocco speaking a native ethnic language that was very similar to the language of the colonizers, the Spaniards, right, that came. And under these circumstances, colonialism, played, a specific role, because it started presenting the encounter between Jews and Spaniards as a reunion, like almost like an encounter between lost family members after 400 years. And the people who worked really hard to develop and convey this narrative were Spanish intellectuals, politicians, but also leaders of the Jewish community, Jose Benoliel and Sarita Nahon, and many people I'll talk about later. And another very significant, layer or aspect I'm developing in the book is that in the 19th century, the Jews of the region became pioneers of Moroccan migration altogether. In the Atlantic Islands, in South American destinations, Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, many other places. But the Jews were often the only, or actually the only representatives of Moroccan diaspora, unlike, as I mentioned earlier, other minorities coming from the Ottoman Empire, from Lebanon, from Syria. Jews were the only ones. So that raises really important questions that I ask in the book about a unique migration of Jews that is not an aliyah. It's not necessarily directed to Israel. It's directed to South America, to Latin America. It brings up all kind of, new set of questions about what, pushed them and what pulled them to Latin America and how that affected their Moroccan identity and Jewish identity. Now, you ask about the general argument or the broader argument of the book. So basically, I try to be very brief. Building on these features and many other features of Moroccan migration, the Moroccan community in northern Morocco, I argue that Jewish migration, transnationalism, diaspora homeland dynamics are much more complex than what we commonly believe or talk about in general conversations about migration. We know scholars about, that talk about migration today usually talk about migrant communities as suspended between two homelands. For instance, Moroccan in Canada. So they're suspended between Morocco and Canada. In Israel studies, you often hear look at a different reverse image when Moroccan Jews develop nostalgia for Morocco after immigrating to their homeland, the Jewish ancestral homeland in Israel. So that's a different, complexity. In Jewish studies, we talk about all kind of, binary frameworks when, for instance, let's think about Polish Canadian Jews who are attached to the cities of origin, Canada, but also Israel, right? That's a different complexity. But my book takes it a step further, saying that transnationalism may be rooted in ties to more than 3 or even 4 homelands, both physical and imagined. Now, you already mentioned this. We're talking about pre-1492 Spain, medieval Spain, modern Spain, colonial Spain, Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, which is a different story, Israel, ancient Israel, modern Israel, and all kind of connections to Morocco stemming from this. So the book tries to create a narrative about how all those destinations and all those historic and modern homelands came together to create a unified narrative about this diaspora as being global. Okay, it's very complicated. I don't want to develop more. I think it's the point is made. But well, again, I'll be happy to answer your questions later.
All right, thank you, Aviad. I know, I mean, I really enjoy reading your book because you show all these complexities. I mean, and certainly goes beyond certain stereotypes and other ways to look or try to simplify something that it's quite complex and rich in terms of the culture, in terms of the religious practices, in terms even of the languages, as you said. But there is one aspect of this community that I would like to explore with you. It's the encounter between those Jews expelled from Spain in 1492 that you mentioned, that in Hebrew we call them the Megorashim, those who were expelled, with the local Jews, those who were already living for, I don't know, 800, 900 years in Morocco, that in Hebrew are called the Toshavim, those who were those living in the place. Exactly. How was that encounter? I mean, I think it was a little bit conflictive also. I mean, it was a little bit disruptive for both communities.
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, you take me back to the very beginning of the modern story I'm telling, because the book focuses on late 19th century, early 20th century. But I mean, you're right. Right after the expulsion from Spain, the community was, and by the way, Portugal too, a few years later, the Jewish community in Morocco became very divided. Now, you mentioned the Toshavim, the Megorashim. The Megorashim arrived with confidence, right? Social prestige, because they came from one of the rising empires of the world, from Spain. Think about it. 1492, it's also the year when they talk about the discovery, right? So it's a year of expansion, unprecedented expansion of Spain westward and also southward. And very quickly, that prestige was translated into communal authority. They came with knowledge, with all kind of new technologies, but also with Jewish pride and Jewish traditions, like the Castilian communal ordinance, the Takanot de Castilla, okay, which were basically rules that cover everyday, dynamics, I mean, it wasn't just like a general, Sephardi rights. It was much more nuanced. It covered marriage and family matters, inheritance, communal discipline, taxation, charity, authority of courts, many other aspects. So soon the newcomers who brought this Takanot of Castilla, or those, broader Jewish traditions coming from Spain, began to shape and assert institutions in Morocco and assert leadership over the local indigenous Toshavim, as you mentioned, community that immediately started to fill the ship. Now, I'll give you one example, okay? Obviously, it didn't happen all over Morocco at once, but certain regions became influenced very quickly. So in Fez, we have until this day a place called Slat al-Fasid, which literally means the synagogue of the natives of Fez. What does that mean? What does it show? That the local Jews, the Toshavim, the indigenous, had to mark themselves as natives precisely because the newcomers had become so dominant in communal leadership and institutions. So they had to basically say, hey, we were here first. We need our own synagogue. Think about it. If you were in Ottawa, for instance, it's almost like someone in Ottawa will start a community or a synagogue of people of Ottawa, because the city is flooded by people coming from different places. So this matter for my larger argument in the book, because it reminds us that the common link we often make between those Spanish-speaking Jews in the north and the Megorashim versus the Toshavim or the Forasteros, those from the south, right? It's much more complicated. It's not simple, because many Jews in Morocco were influenced by the Sephardi rite. They continued to speak Spanish into the 16th century, but in the 7th century, because the northern part of Morocco was a periphery, practically a periphery, that was the only place where the Spanish language was maintained and preserved. But in other places, governor centers, commercial centers, they quickly adopted local Judeo-Arabic or Arabic dialects, right? So the story of the North and its connection to the Spanish language is actually a story of being a periphery in Morocco for centuries. So that's a point I want to make. And obviously, Haketia was very important because it still absorbed a lot of words from the surrounding, and the Muslim population stopped speaking Spanish, even if it came from Spain, together with the Jews. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Okay, let's continue about this connection with Spain, because in Spanish we'll say la madre patria, no, the motherland. But the motherland, that is a little bit complicated. I mean, the relationship with the motherland is a little bit complicated. And in the chapter 2 of your book, where you go to the origins of this community, you explore the fact that these Hispanic Moroccan Jews were very involved in what is known as the Philo-Sephardi campaign in Spain at the beginning of the 20th century. There was a movement of Jewish return to Spain. Actually, a lot of not a lot, but some prominent Spanish intellectuals were involved in
Sure.
this movement.
Yeah,
Could you
definitely.
elaborate a little bit about this, and also how the Jewish life became reinstitutionalized, if you want, in Spain in the 20th century? Because even though we have these Philo-Semites, promoting the return of Jews to Spain, it took a while before officially, during Franco's time, the
Yeah,
community was recognized as a religious legitimate community.
definitely. So these are two different questions, but they actually show the differences between Spanish attitude toward the Jews. They were completely acceptable and welcomed when they lived outside of the Iberian Peninsula of Spain, of the motherland, of the mainland, right? Because Franco did develop this kind of ambiguity toward Jews while he ruled northern Morocco. For instance, I'm talking about Franco because he ruled Spain for much of the 20th century. But when we talk about mainland Jews, of course, they weren't welcome, they weren't accepted until very late toward the death of Franco in 75. Now, going back to the question, I want to set the base or contextualize what I'm talking about in the book, what I call the Sephardi movement. And obviously, it's not my term, but I analyze it. So we have to realize that northern Morocco, since the mid-19th century, became major center of European influence. Okay, this is where the first Alliance Israélite Universelle schools in the entire world were opened in 1862 in Tétouan, and 2 years later in Tangier. And fast forward to the mid 20th century, we're talking about 60,000 Europeans, almost 40% of the people of the city's population at the time, and many of them were Spaniards. Okay, speaking mainland Castilian Spanish. And again, as I mentioned, it created an unusual situation because Jews, Sephardi Jews, came under Spanish power while speaking a language that sounded in many ways like the. Now, Jews increased, I want to answer the question, they increased their interaction with Spaniards to the degree that Haketia began to vanish or demise very quickly. Okay? We
Meaning that
know
they adopted the modern Spanish.
exactly, because basically it was the same language. They even called it Espanol, right? If you look at the text from the 19th century or, records from 19th century, you see that they refer to Haketia as Espanol, okay? Haketia was like a spoken vernacular. Now, already in the early 20th century, we start reading about re-Hispanization, re-Hispanización de la Haketia, coming from all kind of intellectuals. And that meant that the community started to, shed away the Arabic, the Hebrew, the Aramaic, the Amazigh components, elements of the language, because they wanted to speak like habla como las personas, to speak like the people who came from Spain. Now, we have all kind of evidence for this. Philologists like Paul Benichou, who visited Tangier, said the Haketia was nothing more than our living memory. Now, we have all. I don't have enough time, I know, but we have all kind of cultural indications for how Jews became completely intermingled or integrated with Spanish culture because they changed their name. Moshe became Moises, Yehuda became Leon. They adopted this idea of dual surnames, which is very typical to Spanish culture. They went to see bullfights in Tangier, Plaza de la Toros. The Toros, sorry, they went to hear, I don't know, Imperio Argentina, visited Tangier, all kinds of things. Now, this came with a price. It wasn't just a simple love story. We start reading in community or communal publications that the leadership felt it raised anxieties, right? Because some Jews went to celebrate Noche de Reyes. Some started eating non-kosher food.
Yeah, I mean, just to the English speakers, Noche de Reyes, it's a Christian celebration,
Yeah,
very popular in Spain. then just to clarify that.
Yeah. So it's in a way it's it resembles, or it's like Jews going to celebrate New Year's celebration in a way, right? So for the younger generation, it meant modernization, it meant like advancement. But for the old generation, the religious people, it meant that boundaries were crossed. There was a red line that was crossed. Specifically, when we talk about intimate relations, romantic relations, I mean, there is a lot about this too, and I can't develop it. But this is exactly the context where we start seeing an entire salvage ethnography, like a movement coming from within the community that started to mark the boundaries between Jews and Spaniards, or Sephardi Jews and Spaniards. Sarita Nahon, a native of Tangier, Zarita in Haketia, was a native of Tangier who was one of the very first Moroccan ladies, female students to graduate Columbia University in the early 20s. She returned to Tangier with a very big, recording device, started collecting ballad songs, romanceros, the romances sung by old ladies in Morocco. That's just one example. José Ben Oliel, who was trained in Romance philology in Portugal and traveled around the world. He was a great scholar, but he was also a community leader. And he started publishing the very first articles about Haketia in the 1920s, helping to build a new scholarship, or a scholarly field about this dying Judeo-Spanish dialect. Now, you talked about the Spanish side, the Spanish authorities. For the Spanish colonial authorities, this movement of revival, of Spanish Sephardi revival, made a lot of sense. They supported it because for them, it could support this bigger story of, or justify Spain's presence in all Morocco, because they said, well, you see, now we can revive the convivencia, the medieval convivencia. Jews behave like Jews, Muslims behave like Muslims, and Spaniards behave like Spaniards, all under Spanish rule, Spanish authority. And even Franco, I want to end with this, funded institutions like Institutos Maimonides in the 40s. He issued one of the very first periodicals, bulletins, called Sefarad, writing about Sephardi history, or about Jewish connection, or Jewish Moroccan connection to Spain. I hope that's clear enough. I can develop it further if you want later on. Yeah.
All right, but then you have the different diasporas, and I would like to focus on one of them, Latin America, that you mentioned already, the presence of the Hispanic Moroccan Jews in Argentina, in Brazil, and certainly in Venezuela. And I would like you to talk a little bit about the presence of these Jews in these countries, but also about their influence in the social, economic, even political and cultural lives in Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, and even Peru. We can say that.
Definitely, yeah, even Panama. Yeah, so basically you're asking me about their influence, and in that case, what made Hispanic Moroccan Jews in Latin America stand out was not necessarily the small demography, small communities, but the fact that they integrated faster and even more smoothly than many Ashkenazi arrivals in the late 19th century and after the First World War and later on the Second World War. So I think two things really helped them do that. First, the timing. So in several places, including Venezuela and all the places you mentioned, Argentina and Brazil was very prominent in this, they arrived relatively early, already in the early 19th century. Think about it, okay? Not the late 19th century with the bigger waves from Eastern Europe, but early 19th century, mid-19th century, after the opening of the Alliance Universelle in Tangier. That was the second wave. That meant that they weren't as confined as those Jews who came later to dense inner Jewish networks, or to single urban centers where Jews concentrated. They could spread out across the Amazon River. We know all kinds of stories about those who made it, as aviadores, as those owners of ships, that they could mediate, as they did in Morocco, between the local populations and the Europeans on the ports of Brazil, Belém specifically. I don't want to develop it later because we don't have time, but I'll just say that this other very clear practical layer for those who came late, because many Moroccan Jews could leverage the earlier connections, those who came early as pioneers, as networks for the assimilation later on. They had a community to support them, right? When visa came and became an issue, you needed someone to basically say is going to support your presence in the country. Many Jews who came as third-generation immigrant without relatives in the country, specifically in Venezuela, had greater troubles, issues entering the country. So that meant a lot. But there was a different aspect that I want to focus on, which actually matters more and explains the connection with the Hispanic history of Morocco in a clear way. So Northern Moroccan Jews came already Spanish speaking, okay? And that meant quite a lot because they needed less translation or translation work when they entered schools, business, even, did paperwork for their migration. And indeed, many integrated. You asked me about those who made it. So we know about the Minister of Agriculture in Venezuela, Gustavo Pinto Cohen. I don't know if you remember
Yeah,
this.
sure, very well
Yeah,
known. Yeah.
Ministry of Health, Ben-Zikri.
Ben-Zikri.
Ben-Zikri, yeah. I'm twisting it with the Forasteros Arabic, yeah. Isaac Shukron, the novelist, the playwright, the intellectual, in theater, Baruch Ben Asseraf, who was, he won the Nobel Prize for his work in medicine, if I remember
Medicine.
correctly, yeah. Sarah Ben Daan, the first woman, I mean, she was a second generation, as daughter of immigrants, but too, I mean, she
the first woman who graduated as a doctor, medical doctor.
Exactly.
At the main university in Caracas, yes.
And fast forward to these days, Wachnesh, who is now the ambassador, Argentina's ambassador to Israel. Simon Wachnesh. So there are all kind of, indications and examples for this, but we have to understand something else. In Latin America, and I'm going to end with this very quickly because I know we're running out of time. So especially in Venezuela, language didn't operate in a vacuum. It intersected with race, class. You know about the mestizaje, okay? The mestizaje ideology in Venezuela, for instance. So it had this idea of harmonious mixture between populations, between the indigenous, the European, the Africans, the so-called mixed, categories. But in practice, when you look at history, social mobility and modernity have been associated with whitening, right? With looking and sounding closer to those imagined as Spaniards, as European. So for Moroccan Jews or Spanish Moroccan Jews, it carried real social value, coming and looking and passing as Spaniards in many places. And they produced a certain pride in their Sephardi history based on that, in a way, because being Sephardi didn't mean just, having their own specific Jewish right. It also meant that they could claim that they were part of the wider Hispanidad culture, right? Part of the Spanish world and Hispanic world and part of the Spanish family without even losing their Jewish origins or identities. And that connected and resonated very well with their attachment to Morocco, with its own narrative of being multi-ethnic or, having this Andalusian component to its history. Yeah, so I hope that helps.
All right, thank you, Aviad. Then I have a few questions, but then we would like also to hear the question, to read the question from the public. There is the question of Moroccan independence, and we know, and it is known that some Jews in the south of Morocco were very active in the independence of Morocco that took place in 1956. But that we know. For example, there is the name of Nahon-Serfaty, who also got in trouble and was expelled from Morocco and then returned. Well, we know that story. But what about the Hispanic Moroccan Jews? Were they in any way involved in promoting the independence of Morocco, in that case from Spain, because the North Morocco was under, as you said, the Spanish protectorate. Then what was the role, or we have, some names associated with the movement pro-Moroccan independence?
Yeah. So first of all, those fighting for Moroccan independence fought for independence from both Spain and France, right? It wasn't separate. You mentioned Aviad Moreno. So first of all, he came from a Tangier family, right? He was originally from Tangier. And it's interesting you mentioned him because he participated in the independent movement through the left. He was a communist in a way, right? And in this context, anti-Zionism could be framed more as as part of Moroccan patriotism. But at the same time, we have to remind ourselves that identifying with Moroccan nationalism could also merge very nicely among those who participated or even outworked very significantly for Zionism. I'll give you one example. We all know about it's very familiar, okay, or famous. So Leon Ben Zaken, he was the very first Moroccan minister, Jewish Moroccan minister after Moroccan independence. That person, a Tangier native, had been the president of Keren HaYesod, a very Zionist organization in the 40s. So, and that it doesn't just reflect shifting identities, transforming from being Zionist to being Moroccan loyalist. It was very multi-layered in a sense. And I'll give you one example: Carlos Denizri, a Jewish intellectual from northern Morocco, who was a lawyer, a member of the Tangier Council, the Junta, the Tanger Jewish Council. He was also a senior activist in the Moroccan Nationalist Party. And in 1956,
Istiklal,
yeah, in Istiklal, yeah. And he argued, if I'm not mistaken, maybe it was the PDI. Anyway, he argued that Moroccan Jews could remain Moroccans while still culturally and linguistically Westernized. They did not have to learn Arabic to become Moroccan citizens. So they tried to, basically bring together different worlds in their fight for Moroccan independence. They thought that they can continue to stay Hispanic Moroccan Jews even after Moroccan independence. And specifically, Carlos Denizri said, well, we can do that, and we can also integrate our attachment to Israel as long as it doesn't, being reduced to dual loyalty to the idea that we have to immigrate to Israel at one point. So for him, there was this, amalgam, this combination of different identities that could dwell together regardless their contradiction, as we interpret it today. And again, you wanted me to talk specifically about Spanish Morocco. So one reason for this is that many Jews found themselves involved in this Moroccan movement of independence is because they belong to the elite of the Jewish leadership in Morocco in the first place. Okay, they came from those families that immigrated from Tangier and Tetuan in the early 20th century to Casablanca, and they were in a position to lead, to become leaders. So for many of them, that was just a matter of recalculation or recalculating their position as leader of the community. And that's why we see figures like Aviad Moreno and many others integrate into Moroccan nationalism or into Moroccan nationalist movement. Now, another very important factor, and I want to end with it, which is particularly relevant to the north, is that Moroccan nationalists often refer to the notion of convivencia, and more broadly to what we opened our conversation with, the idea of Moroccan exceptionalism, while including the Andalusian component. So in that form, from being a Sephardi Moroccan Jew, a Hispanic Moroccan Jew, could actually mean adding to Morocco, independent Morocco, that component that it searched for, that uniqueness, this idea that Morocco is pluralist and it's comprised of diverse populations. So it works well for Jews even with their Spanish identity. But as we know, fast forward, for many Jews that wasn't enough, and they left the country. Okay, because even when Morocco did accept them and wanted them to stay as full citizens, and they even closed the gates, shut the gates on those who wanted to leave, Still, for many of them, when the ball started rolling and many left the country, for many of them, the choice of leaving the country became even more acceptable and accessible over the years, and they started living. And over the course of this migration, they became more directly attached to Zionism and all kind of additional national affiliations while leaving the country. So that's the story in a nutshell. But obviously, there are much more, many more complexities that I need to cover.
All right, and now let's move to Israel, because we know that the integration of Jews from Arab countries was not an easy thing in Israel. I mean, it was a complicated thing. I mean, they faced discrimination, they faced hardships. But then what happened with the Jews from Morocco, and particularly how the Hispanic Moroccan Jews integrated into the Israeli society?
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so first of all, we have to start with the basis. So in Israel, northern Spanish-speaking Moroccan Jews were usually treated by the state, by the officials, and often by the general public too, as part of this one unified or undifferentiated Moroccan group. Okay, under this broader category of Edot HaMizrach, communities of the East, later known or today known better as Mizrahim, the Mizrahi category, right? Still, when you look closer, socially speaking or demographically speaking, many of those who came from the north did belong to the lower middle class or middle class. That's the reason why they came, arrived to Israel a bit later. And I'm drawing this on, concluding this based on reading the Jewish Agency records from the early 70s. They show, for example, that about 29% of the immigrants from northern Morocco who came to Israel were classified by officials of the Jewish Agency as white collar or free professions. Okay, they were educated in a way, right? They went to high school. They knew how to read and write. That was very important. Whereas that was almost as double as the rate of the average population or the average rate among Moroccan immigrants overall. Okay. Also, wage earners in northern Morocco. When you compare it to Casablanca, the number were higher, right? So we're talking about figures like one wage earner per 4.5 immigrants who came from northern Morocco, compared to 1 per almost 6 in Casablanca, which was in itself a modern city in Morocco. So think about it when you compare it to other more rural places in Morocco or additional urban centers that are less modernized as Casablanca. So many Moroccan Jews came with that, and that's one of the reasons why they often experience themselves as a different group, and they wanted to actively resist being flattened by the state, by the public, as being just part of this single Moroccan community. Okay, and one of the most memorable, prominent events was the creation of Mabat in 1979. Mabat is initial from Mifgash Me Tangier, the reunion of Tangiers natives. It actually was an organization for any Jew who came from northern Morocco, including Ceuta and Melilla, which were under Spanish control, still under Spanish control, Gibraltar and other places that hosted this community or were associated with Spanish Moroccan Jews. Now, they created this organization because they felt, and it appears in their records and in their bulletins, because they feel that they have to explain to the Israeli public that not all Jews from Morocco are of Arab or Judeo-Arab background. And they started talking about specifically Haketia, which meant that they were not just shying away from their, Moroccan origins, but they were basically trying to add to them this additional layer of being Hispanic Moroccan Jews, rather than completely acting white, trying to say, well, we're not part of that world, we're not Arabs, we're not part of this broader Islamic world, we want to act as Western Jews. No, this is not what they did. They did something completely different, and that is to reclaim their Moroccan identity while adding to it this additional layer of being part of both Morocco and the Hispanic world. And this is very prominent in what their organization did. And well, today what remains of it is basically academic infrastructures, all kind of projects and events held in universities in Israel. And by the way, not just in Israel, in other parts of the world.
Yeah, just a quick question for you. Do you think that
Yeah,
that connection of the Hispanic Moroccan Jews with Spain help in any way to rebuild, to open the relations, the official relations with the Spanish state? I mean,
definitely. In 86, you mean?
exactly.
Yeah, definitely. So the creation of a new Jewish community in Morocco, in Spain, that was based on Moroccan immigration, was a very significant stage toward the movement of Spain itself toward democratization, toward modernization after Franco's death. And those were the exact years when we see further collaborations and ties between the Jewish community in Spain and the broader Jewish world, including American Jews, by the way. And Israel was integrated into this. Looking at it from the perspective of the Spanish, leadership, the Moroccan Spanish leadership in Madrid, reclaiming their identities as people who belong to the broader world meant releasing themselves, freeing themselves from the dictatorship in a way. And it made sense because in Franco's later years, he also wanted Spain to get a bit closer to the Western Bloc because he realized that, his strategy didn't really work at the time. So that's a different story. I don't want to get into this, but
Yeah, just to mention that one of the ambassadors was
Ben-Ami. Yeah,
Ben-Ami, Shlomo Ben-Ami,
of course. Yeah.
a Tangier-born Israeli who
Definitely.
became ambassador into Spain, and a historian who is an expert in the Spanish Civil War.
Absolutely.
Okay, and now let's go to a more personal dimension of your book, because there is a family history connection with your book. And I would like you to develop a little bit about that. And certainly a connection of your family also with Venezuela.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so by the way, if you look at the book's cover, it features my grandfather, Alberto Moreno, my grandmother, Flora, and my infant father, who was an infant at the time. And it tells a broader story. So, well, you asked specifically about Venezuela. So my grandfather immigrated to Venezuela. Sorry, my great-grandfather actually immigrated to Venezuela in the late 19th century as a coffee trader. He engaged in the coffee industry at the time. But he sent off my grandfather, Alberto, back to Morocco to study in a Jewish school, Yagdil Torah, which was also funded by the Caracas community in a way. Because such institutions at the time, in the 30s, where we were sent, were not available in Venezuela, obviously. It was way before the opening of Herzl Bialik, which opened, later in the 40s. And in Morocco, my grandfather became a Hebrew teacher at the Alliance Israelite Universal School. And later he became a very prominent Zionist activist in Tangier. He was a secretary of the Tangier branch of the French Federation. Yeah, thank you for sharing this. So in the 50s, when many Moroccan Jews began to leave Morocco to Israel, he and his family did not even have to consider making Aliyah, even though there are stories that he did. They came to Venezuela because it was the most, natural choice for them. He had families, he had, relatives, siblings living there. And he decided basically to stick to his Zionist activism in Morocco in a new part of the Hispanic world. He didn't have to learn new languages. He brought his knowledge in Hebrew from a Spanish-speaking environment in Morocco back to Venezuela, and he integrated very smoothly into the Herzl Bialik school, Mohalik Iluses. Think about it, Herzl Bialik, very Zionist school in Caracas, which was
the Jewish school, the main Jewish school in Caracas, or the only school, actually, the only Jewish school in Caracas at that time.
And yeah, exactly, which was very unique because it attracted almost 90% of the entire community at the time, including non-Jewish students. It was a very significant Jewish institution in Caracas at the time. So he had this option of going as a Zionist activist to Venezuela to continue his Zionist business in a place that is not Israel. Think about it. If he would have, decided to come to Israel instead of Venezuela, I don't think he would really, make it the way he did in Venezuela. Now, I don't know if we have enough time because I see it's already
No,
7.
but just to mention that the family continue with this connection with Jewish education in Venezuela.
Definitely,
It
yeah.
has
My aunt, yeah,
exactly. Your aunt was the
Miriam, yeah,
director of the
yeah,
Jewish school.
true. And my father, that's the the twist. My father decided to leave against the will of Alberto, of my grandfather, by the way, to leave to Israel when he was just 13 years old. And that's the reason why I was born in Israel, as you can hear from my accent.
Yes, very good. Okay,
Yeah.
this is a very interesting story. We can continue, asking questions, but I would like to open the floor now for the public, for those attending the event, to ask questions through the chat. Please don't forget. And we have a first question actually from a descendant, Venezuelan descendant of Hispanic Moroccan Jews, Eddie Ramirez Serfati. And he's asking or making a comment of the situation where the Jewish Sephardi population that emigrated to Latin America, in which country were the more marriages with Catholics? I don't know if you have any idea of that.
That's a very tough question. I don't have the the official information about it. I can only guess or guesstimate. I don't know if it's a good idea to do it. Um, my assumption, okay, general assumption is that in the place where Jews were, the Spanish American Jews were most smoothly integrated, that is Venezuela, you would see greater, intermarriage. But again, I don't have records, and I don't want to, even develop it further because I don't have anything to build on.
Okay,
But
then I
thank you for
will
the
ask.
question. Yeah.
Yes, I will ask all other participants to write their questions in the chat, please. If you have any other question, please.
Yeah.
And I have a quick question about the way the recent laws, particularly in Spain and Portugal, to open the door to give the citizenship to those who claim to have a Sephardi heritage. In what way do you think that has changed the way maybe Spaniards, maybe Portuguese understand what it means to be a Sephardic? Do you have any comment about that?
So you mean okay? So I think basically that's a very good question. We have to realize that being a Hispanic Moroccan Jew in the 3rd or 4th generation didn't mean as much as it meant for the 1st generation. I mean, think about yourself, Isaac, if I may use you as a case in point, okay? So you immigrated to Canada. You were originally from Morocco, okay? But I think most people in North America would identify you as being, Hispanic or Latino rather than Moroccan. So your Moroccan identity faded in a sense. But when did it come back? In events like this, right? There are like context to it. Now, the Spanish Sephardi law, which granted meaningful, concrete, strategic way out of Venezuela, we're talking about a country in tremendous crisis, I don't have to tell you, would also revitalize this connection to Sephardi origin for anyone seeking, to obtain a Spanish passport. But it also worked very well for Israelis, those who were of Moroccan heritage, but specifically those of Spanish Moroccan origins, because those who basically handled the process in Israel, because to get the citizenship you had to take a Spanish test, and in Venezuela it doesn't really matter, it's irrelevant. But in Israel, in a country that the 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation don't speak Spanish as a native language, you are to acquire the language. And those who worked hard to set the ground for it, to set the infrastructure for it, were those places where you could also study about Haketia. I'm talking about the Salti, Center at Brandeis University and the Gaon Center Sorry, this is Bar Ilan and the other one in Ben-Gurion University. Both really worked in imbuing this revived sense of being part of the Hispanic world for those Moroccan Jews who started seeking their connection to the Hispanic Moroccan identity when the law came out.
Then now we have a question for Mordi Yagubi. She's a former student of mine at the U Ottawa, now a doctoral student. And this is an interesting question, and I don't know if what kind of answer we're going to get. But if Spain supports, recognizes Sephardim as Spanish descendant, does that reduce minority vulnerability, status, mobility, or can it increase suspicion of dual loyalty, foreignness, for example, in Morocco or elsewhere?
That's a very good question. So just as the boundary work I described earlier, when some Jews who wanted to mingle with Spaniards crossed the red line and started doing all kind of non-kosher, things, it also worked vice versa for those who could be considered too philo-Semitic. And obviously, it did create certain degree of anti-Semitism, modern anti-Semitism. I don't want to get into this. It's too complicated for the time I have remaining. But obviously, when Jews started coming back to Spain, and they turned from being a myth or a category of absence into being a real community that engages in politics and influences even high politics in Spain, as I mentioned earlier, it did draw some new forms of anti-Semitism, if I understand correctly the question. I hope I understand correctly. But I want to add another very interesting point here. Even Franco, which obviously did carry this degree of anti-Semitism, because don't forget, he, in a way, was in touch with Hitler during Second World War, right? It wasn't part of the Allies. He wasn't part of the Allies. Spain wasn't part of the Allies. He developed this really interesting, cynical perception of Sephardi Jews, saying, well, they're part of the family. I mentioned earlier that he wanted to develop this narrative because it made sense for him to conquer Morocco and hold to that territory. He said, this is the justification I need to conquer Morocco. But at the same time, he talked about Jews as being part of the Bolshevik, communist
conspiracy.
Conspiracy, exactly. So he was an anti-Semite, sorry. He collaborated with Hitler, and at the same time, he embraced Sephardi Jews, saying that they were very different than Ashkenazi Jews. You cannot develop this kind of attitude toward Jews without being fueled by anti-Semitic ideology. That's what I want to say about Franco and his cynical narrative about the Jews that I mentioned earlier.
Yes, and now let's go back. We have a question from our common friend, Nestor Garrido, the director of the Maguen Escudo Journal, from Caracas, actually. And he's asking, now in Spain, you have these strong, at least among a certain population, these strong anti-Moroccan immigrant sentiment. Do you have any idea how the Jewish Moroccan community that is very important in Spain manages this situation?
You mean the Jewish Moroccan community? Because
the Jewish Moroccan community, the Hispanic Jewish community, the Jewish community in Spain that is quite prominent.
As far as I know, I didn't deal with this in my book because it's too contemporary. The book ends the late 19th century, 20th century. But as far as I know, the community did develop this distinguished identity of being Moroccan, but Jewish Sephardi Moroccans, which resonates with what I just said about the fact that Jews could acquire Spanish citizenship, but Muslims could not, even though they can also, maintain that they came from Iberia. They were expelled from Iberia, just as Jews, later on, after the Jews were expelled, the Moriscos. Now, specifically today, I think the community wanted to distinguish themselves from that larger immigrant population that also came with this narrative that we deserve to be in Spain because we were expelled from here. They wanted to tell a different Jewish story, a Sephardi story. And that's something that really resonates with, first of all, politics in Spain that we need to, also delve deeper to understand, but also with this broader narrative of the Jewish Moroccan Hispanic diaspora that in a way shies away from this narrative of being part of contemporary Moroccan politics or Moroccan culture. Morocco is more nostalgic. It's a place we left. It's in our hearts, but it's not a place we want to go back to. In many places, this is the narrative that the Hispanic Moroccan community develops. So that's my, I haven't studied this again, but this is my general impression, from knowing this community, knowing how its mindset works.
Okay, is there any other question from the public? Any other thing that you would like to ask Aviad? Well, if not, I'm gonna give you a few minutes to finish this conversation, to add anything that you consider it's important to highlight. Okay, there is another question for Morphy quickly. Moroccan Hispanic Jews remind me of Assyrians in Iran. Mm-hmm. In both cases, they are historic minorities that are publicly valued as part of a plural national identity, yet mm-hmm. their belonging remain conditional. Okay, interesting observation. Yeah. Any comment, Aviad?
Very interesting, yeah. So I did mention that Jews were the only minority in Morocco, and when we go to other settings, other regional settings or contexts, obviously we'll find all kind of points of comparison. I don't know the Syrian case well enough to develop this further and say, well, these are additional points of interaction or overlapping lines that I can point to. But my general assumption is that, or impression is that, well, it's definitely part of the narrative of the community that they were like indigenous, they were part of a historic entity that was called Morocco, or the Al-Andalus component, the Al-Andalus entity and identity that was part of Jewish history, and this is what we represent in Morocco. So in that regard, it does resonate with the idea of indigenous ancient populations in Iran that can reclaim being pioneers or being, earlier natives of Iran, well, not Iran, Persia, obviously, Iran is a modern name, before the even the mainstream Muslim, population became or turned Iran into what it is today, or what it was in the 20th century before the revolution. Yeah, I hope that's clear enough.
All right, great. And then anything that you would like to add before we conclude?
Yeah, very importantly.
Yes, please.
I want you to give people my email. If anyone has, any further questions, if they wanna, discuss with me things that haven't been discussed today, please feel free to email me. I'm available. How can we do it? I mean, do you have like a mail?
You can share it in the chat.
Now. Yeah, sure, I will.
Right away. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Give me 1 second. So this is my email. Feel free to be in touch. And
thank you, Aviad.
I really appreciate everyone who came here and taking the time to be here today. And thank you, Isaac, for.
Wow, it was great. This conversation was great. I think people also, those attending and those who are going to watch this later on YouTube, also will enjoy very much this conversation. And also, I invite you to read the book because it's a fascinating book. It's very I mean, it's a very interesting history, if you want, but also a story, as Aviad explained, with a personal touch also, that it's certainly fascinating. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Aviad. And stay tuned for future events from the Sephardi Association of Ottawa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording this now.